I'm going to show you why Business Insider warns grocery stores could run out of food in 3 days, not 3 weeks, 3 days. This is truly terrifying stuff. You're also going to see why I'm concerned about Russia and China potentially launching economic attacks that could devastate regular American citizens. If you have any money in the banks or in the stock market, these kinds of attacks could impact you directly, and in more ways than one. When you see what I'm predicting, you'll understand just how close to the edge our economy is teetering, and I'll make sure you see the 3 danger zones that I'm worried about collapsing most. Already the nation is at a breaking point. Forbes calls it the new era of layoffs, hiring freezes, stocks and crypto market crashes. Inflation is crushing Americans, and many economists are talking about recession. It's why Elon Musk emailed employees saying he had a super bad feeling regarding the economy, and why CNBC wrote, Jamie Dimon says brace yourself for an economic hurricane. Make no mistake, even if I'm wrong about the worst case scenario, the forces driving this collapse have already begun. As far back as 2021, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce President Suzanne Clark told CNN Business, the situation is real and it's getting worse by the day. I've made predictions on this scale before, and I've been right more times than I can count. In 2008, I predicted the U.S. housing collapse. No one believed me at the time. 3 weeks later, Lehman Brothers went belly up and markets crashed, devastating the retirement savings of millions of Americans. Then in 2016, the experts were shocked when I predicted Brexit. The media said it could never happen until I was proved right. Then, despite 99% of polls showing the opposite, I stood outside Trump Tower the night before the 2016 election and declared Donald Trump would be our next president. Then in late 2021, several months before the first shots were fired in Ukraine, I alerted my readers this war was an almost certainty. But what I fear could happen if I'm right about this economic super collapse could be far worse. And while you'll never hear Joe Biden admit that, did you know his own Department of Defense gave him 64 recommendations to ensure economic and national security? Look, all my research points to the crisis arriving at your doorstep soon, whether you're ready or not. And most Americans have no idea what's at stake. It's why I've dropped everything to put together a total preparation package for this economic super collapse and a blueprint for Americans to follow to protect themselves. So you can see why I'm predicting the end of the American economy, the way we know it, in the next 6 to 12 months. Like I said, I've never released this information to the public before, but today I'm giving you that chance. That's because, as my fellow Americans, I believe you deserve to know the truth about what I fear could happen to the way we get our food, our energy, and our medicine. These are the 3 danger zones under threat of economic collapse I'm concerned about most, and I'm going to talk about each one now. Danger Zone 1, America's food supply. According to the CDC's website, a disaster can easily disrupt the food supply at any time. In the event of disaster or emergency, they advise Americans to have at least a 3-day supply of food. But have you ever asked yourself, what happens if multiple disasters hit our food supply chains simultaneously? Just look at what's happened so far this year. Putin decided to roll Russian tanks into Ukraine, igniting yet another disaster. As the UN told BBC, Russia's invasion of Ukraine could soon cause a global food crisis that may last for years. That's because practically 1/3 of the world's wheat exports come from Russia and Ukraine. It's why just a few weeks later, Bloomberg wrote, U.S. bread makers fear soaring costs as turmoil engulfs the wheat trade. Of course, wheat is hardly the only thing stores need to sell bread. What about the plastic or paper the bread is wrapped in? What about the ovens used to bake the bread? What about the truckers who bring the bread to the store? I believe a disruption is coming that will deprive Americans of basic food items like bread, eggs, milk, meat, cheese, and more. Because of intense political tensions in the country, rising prices, and intense work schedules to meet delivery deadlines under the supply chain crunch, I believe it's very likely that we will see a long-haul trucker strike in the next 6 to 12 months. I believe that strike would last 2 weeks or more. And do you know what will happen when those long-haul truckers don't go to work for a week? Business Insider reported that when that happens, grocery stores would run out of food in 3 days. Then what? Is the CDC going to tell you they've updated the 3-day emergency guidelines on their website? It will be too late for you at that point. Danger zone number 2, America's energy supply. See, even after a trucker strike, the only way the trucks can deliver our food is if they have enough gas to run on. And right now, we're in the middle of the worst energy crisis since the 1970s. And not just because of rising prices at the pump. As you may know, in the aftermath of that oil crisis, our government built something called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR. For a worst-case scenario we all hope never comes to pass, over the last 50 years it's grown steadily from administration to administration, having recently hit 564 million barrels of oil. And then suddenly everything changed. As NBC wrote, under Biden, U.S. oil reserves to drop by 40%. The article continues, the number will fall to 384.6 million barrels, a level not recorded since 1984. The scary part of this is that the SPR is not actually meant to last this very long. According to one estimate I found before Biden's latest action, it could supply us with oil for about 1.5 years without being replenished. Of course, now that we have 40% less oil, that supply would run out 40% faster. I believe that instead of that oil reserve lasting us a year and a half, it will last us less than a year. I also believe it's extremely likely we could use our strategic petroleum reserve to help Europe. But because of sanctions we imposed on Russia, it's likely that our European allies will run out of oil. When they do, the U.S. will offer to supply them with even more of our oil and natural gas to bail them out. You may think that's far-fetched, but this is exactly what's happening right now. The Washington Times just reported that President Biden has sent 5 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve abroad. And I predict he's going to send far more oil abroad at a time when prices are rising and we're running out of oil. In the process, he's going to destroy everyday Americans' daily lives. As Bloomberg wrote, U.S. monthly oil shipments to Europe climbed to the highest level since 2016. It's why overseas, the English-run BBC reported recently, Russia sanctions, can the world cope without its oil and gas? This is a dangerous and evolving situation about what I fear Putin is planning next, so you aren't blindsided. If you have any money in the banks or in the stock market, this could impact you directly. And if you think all of this is just too far-fetched, please understand this isn't the first time I've warned my readers about what Russia could do to our energy supply. Danger zone number 3, America's medicine supply. Just like trucks need gasoline to deliver our food, the only way our economy runs is if the people who run it, the truckers and everyone else, all have access to necessary drugs and medicine. Up until recently, that may have sounded like a foregone conclusion, and government officials might have reminded us about the other strategic reserve in our country. I'm talking about the Strategic National Stockpile, America's largest reserve of drugs and medical equipment. But then COVID hit. As NBC News wrote, the country's largest repository of drugs and medical equipment is designed to be used as a stopgap, not a solution, during emergencies. Fighting the COVID-19 pandemic was just one emergency that taxed the system. But I believe another catalyst event will be breaking the medical system altogether. Rosemary Gibson, a senior advisor on healthcare, warned government officials about just that back in 2019, saying, medicines can be used as a weapon of war against the United States. Think about it. We're the world's largest economy. That means we have a bullseye on our back. What second largest world economy do you think might have an interest in taking us down? Of course, I'm talking about China. Sound too hard to believe? Well, did you know we get nearly half of all our penicillin from China? I doubt most Americans realize it, but this was stated publicly in a report published in 2019. I believe a coming conflict with China, it could be another trade war, internal conflict within China, or even a serious conflict militarily between us and China will lead to a major breakdown in the critical drug supply to the U.S. China has already had discussions about cutting us off. During the Chinese National People's Conference in 2019, it was suggested, should China reduce the exports, the medical systems of some Western countries will not run well. Since 1942, penicillin has saved the lives of more than 200 million people. We don't even think about all the stuff it's used to treat today because penicillin and antibiotics make these things so treatable. Not having it would be like being transported back 100 years ago, when catching something like scarlet fever could easily result in death. If that were the case today, how long do you think it would be before our food and energy and every other supply chain would grind to a halt?